I haven't missed a an opening day show for a Rajamouli film since Eega. Like I take the day off of work. I know because it's always going to be worth whatever it's going to cost me that
You
day.
ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Movie Reviews with my friend Steve Hackman and myself, James Marsh. On this very special episode of Deep Dive Movie Reviews, we are being joined by Indian cinema expert Josh Hurtado of Potentate Films to talk about RRR, SS Rajamouli, and the growing global interest in South Indian cinema.
Hey, be a great favor to us. If you haven't already subscribed to Deep Dive Movie Reviews, if you just went ahead and hit that subscribe button, while you're there, tap the little bell, and that way you're notified every single time we drop a new video. And just as a reminder, even though we have a special guest today, we may be getting into some spoilers. And Deep Dive Movie Reviews does contain spoilers, so you have been warned.
So this episode is a little different. We are very pleased to be joined by a special guest. Without further ado, Josh Hurtado, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
So we thought we'd just start off by asking you to, tell us a little bit about yourselves. You and I have known each other for some time, but for the benefit of our audience, what is your role at Potentate Films? What do they do exactly? And how are you connected at the moment with South Indian cinema?
So Potentate Films currently is a theatrical consulting company. We've worked closely with the RRR team on re-releasing the film in the US, as well as working on the active awards campaign with various films. How all that came to be is that I've worked with director SS Rajamouli for the last 10 years now in terms of programming films of his in film festivals with Fantastic Fest, which I've worked with James in over the course of the last decade, and also just general excitement for Indian films and trying to spread the word that there's a whole world out there that people haven't really dug into as much as they should, and now we're starting to get some traction.
So where did this interest start for you, would you say? And why Indian films? Why South Indian films particularly? How did that all begin?
Well, I think James and I we're of similar age. James is obviously older than me, and so. But we came up at a time where films from Hong Kong and Japan and South Korea and Thailand and those kind of films were sort of starting to pop up on the radars of international film fans. And so we were all digging in and trying to find what was the newest, coolest thing. And, I was doing that as well in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then sort of somewhere toward the late 2000s, I sort of thought, well, there's India's right there. And no one talks about Indian films. But India makes 2,000 films a year, or nearly that many films a year. And so it seemed kind of odd that no one was really keying in on that part of the world. And so I just got curious and started to, pick out a few films from here and there, and then fell in love with a few that I found. Initially, they were Bollywood films, Hindi language films, things like Om Shanti Om, huge Shah Rukh Khan films and Farah Khan films and things like that. And then soon after that, I discovered there were other industries apart from Bollywood in India. You had the Tamil language film industry, the Kollywood film industry, and then the Telugu language film industry, which is where Rajamouli has worked for 20 plus years now. And when I first saw Rajamouli's Magadhira in 2009 or 2010, it came out around then, and I blindly just bought a disc from overseas just to see what the hubbub was. I was transfixed by what I saw, and so I jumped in head first. And I happen to live in a part of the U.S. where these films, even 15 years ago, were releasing in local theaters, and so I could go see them on opening night with a local crowd, and it was intoxicating just to be in the atmosphere, that we don't really get over here for normal screenings, and I fell in love, and then I just kept kind of going and going, and after in 2012, I went to go see the opening night screening of Rajamouli's Eega in July of that year, and I came home thinking it would be criminal if the only people that ever saw this film were, you know, Telugu expats in other parts of the world. It deserved an international audience. Like, someone needed to see this, and I couldn't quite figure out how to do that, because writing reviews is one thing, but it's difficult to translate that sometimes into, actual viewership. But lucky for me, I wrote my review at whatever it was, 2 o'clock in the morning when I got home from the screening, and I woke up to an email from the other side of the world saying, "Hey, this sounds amazing. We want to show it." And so that sort of kickstarted the idea that, like, oh, this is how I can do this. I can start to help program films in film festivals around the world and start showing people this work that no one really thinks about or knows of, and it's kind of gone from there.
Yeah, for me, that always seems to be the biggest stumbling block, is just availability of this, access to it. I know that, ironically, since I left the UK has actually got a lot better, and a lot of the diaspora markets there have started showing them, and you'll often see Indian movies popping up in the national top 10 in the charts. The general public has never heard of. Yeah. But there are these small pockets, and it's fascinating that you live in one of those areas, because even here in Hong Kong, it's really hard. Every now and again, there's like one movie that gets released, but outside of the general circuit as well, by just an independent distributor at one cinema over one weekend. And if you're not on the email chain, you don't know anything about it. You never see it advertised anywhere.
That's absolutely the case.
I'm very grateful that James and I got to see RRR on the big screen with some of the local population here in Hong Kong just before it came on Netflix, because I would have loved it on Netflix, but seeing it kind of with some of the local Indian crowd in the big screen here in Hong Kong was a much better experience, as you can imagine.
Absolutely. It's a film that's tailor-made for a huge screen and a huge crowd.
And I have to say, it's you that put it on my radar. It was you posting sort of about, because I knew who Rajamouli was because of the Bahubali films, and so I saw you posting, oh, he's got a new movie coming out, and so I checked in with that local distributor, and they were like, oh yeah, no, it's coming. Now, unfortunately, we saw it in a Hindi dub. Even on the big screen, there was a Hindi dub. I guess just catering to that particular local Indian audience, it made sense to do it that way. So it was a Hindi dub with English subtitles. But still, it was such a sort of memorable experience, just being able to see it so big and so loud. And that seems to be a real sort of driving impetus behind what you're doing with the film right now.
Yeah, and it feels like, I mean, I if I recall correctly, because I was, we've known each other for a long time, and so I was kind of watching to see like when it would hit you, because I knew that you'd seen Bahubali, and we'd both over the years sort of interacted with Rajamouli on at different points throughout the last decade, and so like I was curious to see when it actually hit, because I know your theaters and your local theaters opened later than ours did, significantly so. And but I haven't missed an opening day show for a Rajamouli film since Eega. Like I take the day off of work. I know, because it's always going to be worth whatever it's going to cost me that day. And over here in the States, one thing that's sort of curious about the way South Indian films work in their traditional distribution channels in the US is that they have like a week or two sort of premium price point that they do with their release for the first couple of weeks. And so, for example, I went to see RRR on the very first screen that was available in town, on the IMAX screen that was available in town, and it was, I think, $40 a seat or something like that. And so my wife and I went to see it. And then, if you if that was on I think a Wednesday afternoon, because it translates to Thursday morning in India, so we're all seeing the film at essentially the same time.
Fantastic.
And then by Friday it's down to $30, and then by the next weekend it's down to $25, and then it sort of drops off until you get to like 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks out, where it's down to like normal standard US, like general Hollywood ticket pricing. And so like I've been doing that for years, and it's expensive for sure. But it's I liken it because of where I live and the population that's here in the Dallas area. There's a lot of Telugu migrant workers here, Tamil migrant workers here, a lot of Indian migrant workers in the Dallas area in general. And so it's essentially like a rock concert. Like when you go to the movie, it's like a rock concert. It's the crowd is a big rowdy crowd. It's not just going to see and watch something passively happen to you. It's a thing it's reciprocal between the film and the audience, which is it's totally worth all the expense to me.
It seems like it has a Rocky Horror element to it. And I mean that in the best sense
It's getting
of the
there.
word.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's getting there for sure.
Yeah.
You know, and it was the first 3 weeks of the film's release. The Indian diaspora obviously knew who Rajamouli was. The Telugu diaspora knew who Rajamouli was, and so they came out on opening day and for the first few weeks, whatever. And so, but by probably 10 days later, so that would be, you know, the opening Wednesday through there was a full week, and then the following Monday, all of those people had seen the movie already. And so that following Monday, with a full week passed, I went to go see the film with my son, and we were the only two people in the audience. It was just him and I watching it. That was my third time watching the film. And, you know, I wanted to experience the thing with him. And so we were just high-fiving each other through this whole movie alone in this theater, but it was still like, it wasn't quite the same, you know?
Well, was that kind of a bit of a sort of eureka moment for you where you were like, something is not right here, that it's not breaking out beyond the diaspora. It's like the Indian audience are going to see it en masse opening week, but then nobody else is.
Yeah, it was a lot like that. And one of the things is, you know, so my history again with Rajamouli is having booked Eega into film festivals 10 years ago. With, you know, we started with L'Étrange in Paris, and then Fantastic Fest, and like just a bunch of film festivals. It played a bunch of places. They took the film to the Cannes Film Market the following year and they ended up getting like a Swahili dub sold, and like all these crazy things happened that they weren't even like they hadn't imagined a world outside of their own market that they'd built for so long. That, you know, having had from that point introduced the film to some festival audiences along the way, and then people who kind of knew who he was. And then with the Bahubali films, there were like a few more people who were sort of in the know who knew who he was. The first Bahubali, not so much, back in 2015. By this time the second one rolled around, more people knew who he was, and so that was a bigger success. In fact, the second Bahubali film is it's a quantum leap in terms of box office beyond the first one here in the States. I think the first film made maybe 5 million. The second film in the States made 20 million domestic box office. It's still made more by a significant margin than RRR has. In terms of box office, but it was that film's ticket returns were all almost entirely Indian audiences going back over and over and over again. But what happened was that in starting that audience back in 2012, and then sort of slowly growing it over the years, and then there were a few key people who had seen it at film festivals, or had seen Bahubali over the years, that were like, okay, well, we know this name, and we know he's coming out with a new film. And then, you know, the state of social media, even in 2012 versus today, was very different. And so people are a lot more vocal these days. And what ended up happening was that the people who saw it saw RRR in the initial run before Potentate, myself, or Variants were involved, were very vocal about it. and the people in India, Rajamouli's team, were sort of intrigued. They didn't really know what to make of it, and that's when they got in touch with me to see, like, can we do anything with this? Like, what's happening? We don't know what to do. And then that's when I came on board, and Dylan at Variance came on board, and things started to sort of roll into a different, like, general, let's tell people who Rajamouli is, kind of direction.
Have you found something that's working? Like, I think James and I were saying, even though RRR, it made our top 10 films of the year of 2022, I'd have to say that's the film that I'm the most evangelist towards. Like, I'm preaching the good news of, you have to see RRR. I tell people that all the time. And, I get from a lot of my Western friends, an Indian movie? Really? A 3-hour Indian movie? Really? And I always say, just watch the first 40 minutes up to the credits. And I said, if after 40 minutes you're done with it, then that's up to you. But I guarantee you will keep going. And that has been the results I've been getting. People coming back to me. I think James can attest to the same thing, where people are just, thank you for recommending this film. It's just, I think, a matter of getting the word out. How are you finding it in America? What are kind of the vehicles that you're finding effective?
Well, one of the things that's been the most effective process we've been through is the fact that Indian films, whether they be Bollywood, like big Hindi language films that have always played in multiplexes here, even though people don't really know about them, or the South Indian films, is the fact that all of those films, not only in the US, but in other diaspora markets, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's, Malaysia has a big market for South Indian films. Middle East has a big market. Germany is a big market. England obviously has a huge market for these films as well. They've always depended on, expats who are following the news from back home, who know what's coming up, and so they didn't think they had to market to those specific audiences. Like, they never marketed outside of the diaspora,
Right.
which is something that I've thought about for a long time. Like, why don't you ever, like, you could spend almost nothing and get some kind of return for it. It wouldn't really damage you in terms, financially. And so that's what we've brought to RRR. Like, that's the new thing that's happening now. We have a few people in, sort of key spots, who have been fans of Indian cinema, who have been exposed to Rajamouli's work before, who are writers who write for major outlets, who enjoy these films but really haven't had the opportunity, or the opportunity to write anything about them. Like, if you think about it, Bahubali 2, which was in 2017, again, like I said, made $250 million worldwide, made $20 million in the States, did not have a review in the New York Times, was never reviewed in the New York Times, which is crazy. If you think about the fact that any movie that made $20 million didn't get a review in the New York Times, that's insane. And it's just because the $20 million that it made in the States wasn't from people who read the New York Times. And that's like, that's how it works.
Yeah.
But it's not, we have, for example, someone, a writer like Simon Abrams, who writes for New York Times, who writes for Roger Ebert, who's done these sort of things, who knows of the work of Rajamouli, and who, when RRR came out the first time, I know that he went to go see it, and he even lamented being on Twitter, like, lamented publicly that he could not find an outlet to run a review of the film. And so that's what we were trying to, like, grab onto. Like, these are people who are influential writers, who understand cinema, who understand what the potential is with this director, and sort of went with, let's talk to these people who are there. It's a marketing game with anything like this. You want to try and find people who are going to engage with the work where it exists. And also, like, honestly, and my guys back here will probably get pissed off at this, but we want them to help us. Like we want them to help. Like we want to get the word out, you know?
Yeah.
And it's because like I love this filmmaker and I love this film. And there's, you know, that's what it boils down to. And so we try to like reach out to people that we know who love the filmmaker, who love the film, and try to get the word out, you know, just talk about it. You know, that's all it takes. You know, if we talk about, you know, the encore screenings that we did when we first took up this project back in the spring, the film had already had a full cinema life. Like in terms of what Indian films, the theatrical lifespan, the theatrical, you know, window is, it had a full life. It had a longer than a full life, because a lot of these Indian films, when they're released in the US, have and they're usually released concurrently in the US and India. There's essentially a 3 to 4 week window before they land on some OTT platform. You know, whether it is Netflix or Amazon Prime, or one of those big ones, or whether it's a diaspora outlet like Sony Live or Z5, or like there's a million coming out of India. And so what we wanted to do was to try and, initially the plan was we were going to have our theatrical release for the film, our one night event on June 1st. That was the plan. It was announced. We had the LA Times had announced it for us. We were all good to go. And then Netflix was like, nope, not happening. We're going to release it on May 20th. And so Netflix released
I remember that happening, and yeah,
it was a confusing time for all of us. But Netflix, you know, because Z5 had released it in the Telugu-language on the same date, on May 20th. But Z5 was a diaspora outlet, and so it wasn't necessarily going to conflict with, you know, normal interests in the US. Like I have it because I have to, you know, go through hoops to whatever, and this is what I do. But like your regular average Joe doesn't have, you know, whereas Netflix, everyone has, or has access to in any case, you know, through their parents or whoever is paying the bill.
Through that one account that everybody shares.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I remember waking up that day or the day before to frenzied messages from our partners in India saying, we have a problem. Netflix has decided to do this thing on this date. And, you know, we had to like sort of scramble to figure out like what that means for us. You know, all of our wheels were already in motion. Like there was no stopping this train. The film was going to release back in theaters. And the whole plan was we get this one night out there, we get people to go see it and people talk about it and whatever. And the curious thing about it was that it didn't hurt. You would imagine that a film releasing on a major OTT platform like Netflix would significantly damage theatrical prospects, but it really didn't. What ended up happening was we had, you know, thousands of responses to the film from people saying, I wish I'd seen this in a theater. And then we could respond saying, in a week you can. We're going to do it. And that's what happened. And it's been playing more or less continuously in cinemas since June 1st, since we released it.
Wow.
You know,
that's great.
Not you know, huge numbers, but still, and the box office of the film that we've since the encore screenings has not been tremendous. Like we haven't doubled the initial box office or anything, or even come anywhere near anything like that. It's been relatively modest in terms of the actual money that's come back, but the responses have been incredible.
What do you think it is about Rajamouli's films? Because you saw in 2012 Eega, and then that kind of changed. You know, you got a new mission in life. I saw Eega for my first time this week, but one of the thoughts I had was, as fantastical as the premise is, I could see it translating into and being accepted by a Western audience. Like I could promote it, and I could see where, you know, a film industry that's making 2,000 films a year, but the style of the film sometimes will find difficulty making that translation into an international or Western environment. But Rajamouli has seemed to be the vehicle that is best able to do that. Do you think there's a reason for that? What would you see as his recipe for success there?
It's been an evolution for him, for sure. Like with if you look back, you know, currently, Potentate Films is working on we're touring a retrospective of his work in North America, and we have films going back to 2007, with his film Yamadonga, which was his third film starring Junior NTR. So Junior NTR, who's plays Beam in Triple R, they're no strangers. But that film was really sort of it's like the cusp of because that was his, I think, fifth or sixth film, Yamadonga was. And so it's right on the cusp of where he starts to change from being like a typical Telugu potboiler director, just making good quality blockbuster films, like nothing special, but just really solid, doing what he does really well, into something more adventurous. And if you look at the way his films have evolved, he's tapered off the sort of local aspects, the local comedy, which is very prevalent in Telugu film and South Indian film in general. And one of the things that makes it very difficult to access for outsiders is, mile-a-minute inside jokes. There are, the same performers who are in every single film, and the local audience will start laughing the moment a certain face appears on screen, which is very alienating for outsiders unless they've been, indoctrinated into this whole community of, this film industry. And with Eega, that was like one of the first films where he didn't completely abandon it. If you remember in the film, there are fairly few moments that are sort of alienating in that way. There's a one specific moment where an actor breaks into the house of Bindu, and there's this sort of comedic interaction between the two, or not between the two, where she's talking to the fly and he thinks she's talking to him, and he falls in love with her, and et cetera, et cetera. And it feels sort of out of place in the whole film, unless you know who that guy is, and then it's hilarious, And so that's kind of the last moment, actually, probably since then. That's the last moment in the film, and well, it continues in the credits at the end of the film.
Yeah, there's a little coda about it, isn't there?
A tiny bit, yeah. But that's the last sort of moment of that type of sort of insider comedy in Rajamouli's work, that's designed specifically to cater to the Telugu audience. Here's this guy, you guys think this guy's funny, I'm going to put him in here for 5 minutes, and then you're going to laugh, and we'll go on with our story. And then after that, he went from Eega, which was a super high concept film. Apart from that one little diversion, it stands on its own. It's in fact, the two, well, I guess the three main stars of the film, which would be Nani, who's dead after half an hour, Samantha, who plays Bindu, and then you have Sudeep, who is essentially the lead and does a wonderful job in the film.
Very much.
None of those actors were super famous in the Telugu film industry. Nani and Samantha were fairly young, and now they're seasoned performers 10 years later. Sudeep wasn't even he'd been famous in his own language group, which is Kannada, from Karnataka. But he was not a Telugu film performer. I think it was probably his first Telugu film, and he's done a lot of stuff since then. He's actually shows up in Bahubali, the first one, for a brief moment. And so
I just got to say how much I enjoyed his performance in Eega.
Oh, it's so good.
Watching him go from this creepy guy that just oozes, everything that disgusts me, to me almost feeling empathy for him as he has this mental breakdown with his battle against a fly. I really enjoyed that film.
It's a very unique sort of film where like he is the lead performer.
This is what struck me, is that essentially the villain is your main character, but you're not supposed to really sympathize with. He's still the bad guy, very much the bad guy, but he's the guy that's on screen the whole time. And yeah, it was really kind of novel in that way. The other thing that struck me is that obviously you've got a lot of CGI kind of going in, computer generating animation, but outside of that, it actually feels like quite a sort of modestly budgeted, quite small production, really. There's only a couple of sets where everything is happening. There's the apartments and the offices and a few things like that, and it feels actually very sort of modest, almost on a scale of kind of like a daytime soap opera or something like that. But then it's, you know, every 5 minutes or whatever, you have this huge effect sequence with the fly, and it was like, okay, there's this real kind of it felt like a sort of an industry in flux, if you like, pushing the boundaries of what they could get away with or what they could afford to do.
Yeah, and for sure, like I've hosted a few screenings of Eega with Rajamouli at this point. You know, as we've done, you know, we did one at Beyond Fest in LA back in October, and we did one in New York in early November. And I've had a chance to talk to him more about it because, you know, when I first started booking it, I was just some weird guy on the other end of an email, and now I've had the opportunity to talk with him more. But one of the things that I didn't realize until I actually started talking to him about it in these Q&As was he what he initially wanted, and he still insists is his goal, is kind of a one for me and one for you situation, which you hear about a lot with these sort of like big name directors. Like, I'll make one big budget movie to sell a bunch of tickets so that people will allow me to make my little movie to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And so he made a film called Magadira in 2009 with Ram Charan, which is a wonderful, it's a very sort of Tollywood esque film, you know, with the usual comedic asides and all that sort of stuff, and, you know, crazy musical sequences set in Switzerland for no good reason and all this kind of business. But it's exceptionally well executed, and it sort of serves as a dry run for Bahubali because there's a whole you know, flashback sequence that's set 400 years ago, and so they're able to do like a lot of the costume, you know, sword and sandals business in that film. And then the idea was that with Eega, and what he said was that the initial plan with Eega was that they were going to shoot it in 30 days. He was going to shoot it on GoPros. And just that was going to be his, like, let's just get this out of the way and I'll move on to Bahubali, because that was his dream at the time.
So Eega was one for them.
Eega was one for him. That was he was going to make his like his high concept, low budget movie just to get it done, because what the plan was that he had planned Bahubali for years. And he knew that Prabhas, who plays Bahubali in the two films, was going to be the star, but Prabhas had other obligations at the time, and so they had to, like, he had this pocket of time between where Marietta Ramana, which is his previous film, which is a Buster Keaton remake that he made in 2010, and where Bahubali came in. And so the idea was like, well, we think we have 2 years so we can do all of our pre-production and also the whole production and get it all done, and we can have the actual shoot happen in 30 days and get it done. And then Prabhas's film ended up taking a lot longer, and the pre-production on Eega started to, like, his producer was like, oh, well, this looks really good, I want to actually put some money into this and actually like make this a real big thing. And so then Eega ended up being a 3-year project instead of a 6-month project. And instead of costing, you know, $250,000, ended up costing $8 million. And it was like it was a big paradigm shift for him in terms of what he had done. And what he told me was that he still wanted to do like the one for them and one for me kind of idea, but then like all of the one for me's ended up being like bigger and bigger and bigger budgets over the years. And so,
well, that
like,
attests that's just a test to how, you know, successful he's become. Because I imagine pitching the idea to make it a them movie is, hey, I've got this idea about a guy who, you know, basically is in battle with a housefly the whole film. That doesn't immediately lend itself to, oh, this is going to be a blockbuster.
No, it doesn't. It's a super high concept, very weird idea, and even he thought that it was a very weird, strange idea that he wasn't going to get a whole lot of money for. but he really wanted to do it. His father, who's a screenwriter and story writer, was very involved and was like very excited about the idea. But his producer for that film, Sai Korpati, was over the moon with the idea, and so they just went with it and said basically, here's a blank check, do what you got to do and make this thing happen. And it worked out, obviously.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that was the film that I first heard about of his stuff. I'm sure it was, Todd and you and other people writing about it on Twitch at the time, and I was just like, and it was really being pushed as this ultimate high concept, like a guy gets reincarnated as a fly and it's a revenge movie, but he's a fly. And I was like, well, that just sounds bonkers. I didn't get to see it for a couple more years after that, but it always was stuck in my head. And actually, it wasn't till I had that opportunity to meet Rajamouli, when I had to actually step in for you when you couldn't travel, that they were like, oh, you have to watch this before you meet with him. And I was like, okay, yeah, cool. And finally I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, this is something special. I'm interested in how you were able to convince Rajamouli and co that you could do this for them. And to the point where when it comes around this time, they're reaching out to you and going, what can you do for us? Because that seems fascinating.
Well, after having worked with them on Eega, my role in that is essentially an evangelist. Like I booked it for Fantastic Fest, I booked it for L'Étrange in Paris, and I helped them book it for various other genre film festivals around the world, because that's kind of that's the world he lives in, and proudly so. And I'm thankful for that, because there's not enough people who are like just happy being in that universe, that don't want to like expand beyond or whatever. Like he knows what he does, and he does it really, really well. And and that's really great. And every time that he made a film after that, when Bahubali came out and the second one came out, I've kept in touch just to say, you went to on a set visit for the first Bahubali, and I went on a set visit for the second Bahubali, and I've always kept in touch with him when I'd seen those films on the big screen, to say, oh, it's great, because I'm not just blowing smoke up his ass. Like he makes great movies, and so I want to like let him know, like, I'm still thinking about you. Like this is good stuff. Like I want to let you know that I'm paying attention. And when Triple R came out, honestly, I'll say that I had gotten the pitch from the Triple R team probably 2.5 years ago for the film.
Okay.
Because the folks that worked on the second Bahubali film, who I'd become fairly close with and I'd kept in touch with over the years after my set visit, they'd sort of sent me messages, this is the next thing coming, and they give me like a rough sketch of the film or whatever. And I'd read it a couple of times, and I was like, I don't know that this is gonna work. It seems kind of like sketchy. The idea of, these two revolutionaries, I don't know who these people are. I don't know what you're trying to do with this movie. Like on paper, it doesn't really work as well as the things I've seen previously. I don't know what's going to happen with this, but sure, I'll go see it. It's a Rajamouli film. I have faith that I'll at least be entertained. That was the sort of mindset I went in on opening night when I bought my first tickets. And I came out and I was like, oh yeah, he knows what he's doing. I don't need to worry about the specifics. I'm overthinking this far too much. And I think what essentially it boils down to is the fact that after Eega and after Bahubali and after Bahubali 2, the audience had grown sort of incrementally. It wasn't a huge thing, but there were people who were aware of who he was, and they were aware of who he was through film festival work and through people again like Simon Abrams, who maybe not have reviewed those films for his major outlets, but spoke about them through his Twitter feed and things like that. But and this is one of the things I'm sort of I have struggled with over the last sort of 10 years is, how do I turn enthusiasm into something tangible? How do we take a small core group of people who are very enthusiastic about a thing into something that we can actually, get to spread out further, to take these few people and to get them to help spread the word for us, to evangelize for us, essentially. And with Triple R, a lot of the people that were initially in the first, it was 10 days, essentially. The first 10 days of release, there was like a core group of people who I know and who I also happen to know had seen Rajamouli's work because of the work that I'd done, which was, lucky for me. And then, having kept in touch with him, even just sort of checking in, your film is great, thank you very much, like what's going on now, that kind of thing, that they were able to come back to me and say, well, this is happening. People that we don't expect to watch our films are now watching our films. Like, what do we do? Like, right. Can we do something?
How do we capitalize on that?
Exactly. Well, how do we capitalize? And so there are, and that's sort of the trap that a lot of Indian films, the best Indian films, the best sort of like big blockbuster Indian films have fallen into, is they don't have any way of, accessing or interacting with audiences outside the diaspora, because they have never had to do that, because they've always felt like the audience they've built over the last, whatever decades is enough for them. But I don't feel like it is. Like, I feel like they're leaving so much on the table, and I've been very vocal about that over the years. And these guys listened.
And that's great to hear. I mean, the result, the reason I first heard about RRR was by another evangelist. I think it was Patrick Williams' YouTube site, and he did a whole thing on the best movie of 2022 that you haven't seen. And I watched that whole thing. And I remember telling James, have you heard of this movie called RRR? And him saying, oh yeah. He had heard of it and knew of it. And we kind of, I said, oh, I really want to, and we were able to find that they were going to screen it here in Hong Kong. But it's a result of, it's a long way of saying of, that whole, it's almost like a religion. One person tells another, they get excited about it. They tell two friends who tell two friends, and so on and so on and so on. But I will say, in just Western media, anything from like the New Yorker, I'm pretty sure New York Times has done something now on RRR. Am I correct there? Because I read New York Times, and I can't say specifics, but I know over the last 3 or 4 months, I've been seeing in print media, as well as not only on YouTube, and that just an increase exposure of RRR outside the diaspora, as you mentioned.
Yeah, it's weird, but I had to go like hunt down in Dallas like actual print copies of the New York Times, because they interviewed me, and like having your name in the New York Times is like that's a crazy thing to happen. For Potentate and what we've done with Variants and Dylan Marchetti and like all those guys, we've been in there a couple of times. The LA Times similarly did basically the same thing, and like I said, this is Triple R is the first actual review of a Rajamouli film that has appeared in the New York Times. And it also, even though Bahubali made more money, like I said, still has made more money by a significant margin. We got reviews in Rolling Stone. There are reviews in LA Times. There are reviews in like all of these big outlets that are foreign. The concept of getting a review for a South Indian film in a major American outlet is still very foreign. If having done this for the last 12, 13 years now, like I'm on, and Marsh can attest to this as well, because he's in a similar position. Like I'm still on a lot of the mailing list for all the press in the US, and so because I also sort of specialize in Indian film and have for a long time, I have this like sort of very niche pocket where I get messages for the very, rare screenings of Indian films in the US that happen for press, which is it's exceedingly rare, and almost exclusively in New York City. Like in New York City, you can go see a film, whatever it is, 12 hours before it releases to the general public, and and so I can't do anything about that because I don't live anywhere near New York City. Um, uh, and so that's been the program for so many years, is that they don't care. Like the Bollywood, the big Hindi film industry, doesn't care because they have an audience here. You know, Tollywood, Collywood, Mollywood, Malayalam, Tamil, Telugu film languages, Kannada films, they don't care because they have a built-in audience here who knows what's coming. And so the idea that anyone who is not a part of those communities would be interested is still a very foreign and very unusual idea. And so that's what Potentate and Invariants on this run have been sort of figuring out a way to, like, that doesn't have to be the case. Like, they have their established distribution channels and their established exhibition channels in the US. But that doesn't mean that they have to only exist there. And I think that's what RRR initially was planning on, along with all the other films from the same regions, is that they can make all the money that they need to make using their existing distribution channels. And one of the things that I've fought for a long time and tried unsuccessfully mostly over the last decade is to inform people who are sort of adventurous film goers. Like, there is this other thing that is happening probably fairly close to where you live, as long as you are willing to go and take a chance on, and with RRR, they were happy to take a chance on us, getting the word out in a way that they are not accustomed to, and it's worked out.
So when did the conversation and by extension the strategy pivot to not just like, oh well, let's get some more screenings, let's get more bums on seats, let's get more eyeballs on this movie, to being, we might have a legitimate awards movie here because it's the end of the year and you're seeing it pop up on a significant number of top 10 lists, almost to the point where you're like, well, where's RRR on this list? Why isn't it on this list? They must have not seen it. And Rajamouli even already winning awards. Like, was it New York Films Critics Circle? He was named best.
I'm heading up there in 2 days to go support him for that one. Yeah,
that's nuts. So what? Yeah, when did the conversation change? And because that's a ballsy move.
Yeah, it is, and it was probably late summer, early autumn when that happened. Like I said, we released the film on June 1st in the States, and that was the largest release of the film, was that single day, and we had about 175 theaters across the United States showing the film. And initially, the idea was, we'll do that, and then if anybody wants to keep it going, we'll help them keep it going. But we didn't have any like concrete plans beyond June 1st. That was it. Then, screen, all the theaters in New York sold out, all the theaters in LA sold out, so they had to keep adding screenings for it. And so LA kept adding screens, New York kept adding screens. If you've I don't know if you saw this, but in New York, starting on the 23rd of December, there's Cinema Village in New York has showed the film all day for free. And so you just have to basically show up to the theater and you can go and see the movie, or you can reserve a ticket for $1. It's a fun stunt, and hopefully got some people in the theater, to go see the movie. But it was somewhere before we did the Beyond Fest screenings in LA. It was somewhere between, because Rajamouli was invited to speak at the industry conference at Toronto International Film Festival back at the beginning of September. And I was fortunate to be able to help him with that and moderate that conversation. And so I was there. Dylan with Variants was there because Variants not only has done RRR, they're also doing EO. He's doing Decision to Leave. Like he's
okay.
And he did Drive My Car last year. So this is kind of his wheelhouse. It's the international, prestige films. And so the conversation sort of came to a head around that time, at the beginning of September, when TIFF was happening. And it wasn't necessarily us so much, Potentate and Variance Films who were working on the RRR release, as it was a lot of the usual awards campaign publicists, people that Dylan works with, like I said, with Drive My Car last year, or other films like that, who had seen the film and had seen the reactions the film was getting, who were thinking, this is not something that you want to ignore. You don't want to leave this alone. You can do something with this. And so we had to, we had to talk to Rajamouli and the team, and kind of convince them that, like, this is going to cost some money. This is not it's not a cheap endeavor. You can't do this for free. It's not all just people love the film, so they're going to nominate. You have to, like, actually campaign for it. And once they started to see that things were happening, they were like, okay, well, let's do this. And so it was around that point, at the Beyond Fest screening at the Chinese Theater, which we're going to repeat here in a week. It was a lot of not a lot, but a significant number of seats were reserved for voting Academy members, to come out, see the film, because it's one thing to watch it at home. And don't get me wrong, I've watched it at home 10, 11 times. Who knows? I don't even know. Initially starting
on all the time. Yeah,
that's right.
And I'm not getting paid for that. I'm paying for that service. But the thing is, like, you put it on just thinking, oh, well, I want to watch the first 15 minutes where Rom fights 1,000 guys. And then, like, oh, well, like in 5 minutes, then Beam's going to fight this tiger. Oh, well, then in 10 more minutes, then they're going to do this thing. And it spirals out of control. And I've watched the whole movie again.
I've done the same thing. thing.
And it's great and it's wonderful, but it's not the same as seeing it in a room full of people. And so
I'm envious you've seen it on IMAX. We didn't get to see it on IMAX. I would have loved to have seen that on IMAX.
Well, my very first screen, the first day, first show, before any of this started, when I was just like, I love Rajamouli, I'm going to go see this movie, I'm going to pay out my nose to go see it. Was the IMAX here in Dallas. We have a proper IMAX 1570, like, gigantic screen I went to go see it on. But I did, with the Chinese screening, and I was fortunate, like extremely fortunate, to go see it, like, on the biggest IMAX screen in the US and the second biggest IMAX screen in the US the next day. And, like, it was like, I want to be here for all of this as much as I can. It's been a really crazy experience for the whole thing.
It's now award season, and RRR is very much in the conversation, to the point where I've seen a number of top tier, like Variety and Gold Derby, and talking about not only a best picture nomination seems almost a given at this point. I mean, I'm sure you don't want to say that to jinx it, but they seem to consider it's almost a given. But also that Rajamouli getting a Best Director nomination is the most likely international director outcome this season. Not Park Chan-wook for Decision to Leave, or anybody else. But they're saying if anyone's getting it, Rajamouli's getting it. Now, that's got to be pretty exciting.
I was just going to add, Rajamouli getting nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards, if it happens, has got to change the whole mindset of everything you've been saying about this idea of we create movies for our audience, and we don't really think much beyond that. If that occurred, I mean, he doesn't even have to win. Just being nominated, I hate that cliche, just being nominated is the prize enough. But that would have to do something in the whole industry and India's mindset. Wouldn't you agree?
I mean, I don't think it's impossible that would, change his perspective. But, I've talked to him over the last, whatever it is, 8 months now, 9 months, who knows at this point. And what people love about Rajamouli is the Rajamouliness of what he does. Like, he has his own zone, and he's really great in it. And I've talked to his team, and I keep telling them, like, just don't change what you're doing. Don't try and veer off into some other lane.
No.
try and like to
cater to an international audience or something
exactly,
like that.
Exactly.
Well,
like
I didn't even mean so much Rajamouli specifically. I would totally agree with that. I'm wondering outside of Rajamouli, like other the whole industry in general, because that would be something that would, to me, it just seems like it would be a game changer.
It could, and I've been speaking with other filmmakers. Like again, I've been following specifically South Asian, Indian, and Bangladesh and Pakistan, like these filmmakers for a long time. And like there's so much talent that no one is picking up on, that nobody knows about, that are these filmmakers that are making really, really great stuff on at all scale levels, from like super tiny independent films to really big budget stuff, just under Rajamouli's level, obviously, because he's at the top of the heap right now. But there are filmmakers who have the potential to be recognized internationally as world-class filmmakers. That the idea that this one director from India has now shined a light on this whole subcontinent as a place that is no longer, to be ignored. Like you cannot, and this has happened in film festivals for years and years and years. Is you can read us, and we've done film festivals, or you read a synopsis, you see the runtime of the film, you see the origin country of the film, and you kind of have to make like a split-second decision: am I gonna waste my time on this thing? And for a long time, the idea that like the nation of origin was India was like, I don't know if I want to do that. I kind of think I know where this is going.
Because it's like it's going to be a 3-hour musical.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, they're just like,
and honestly, for as with any other industry in the world, that's 90% of the time going to be correct. Like it's there's just because you make 2,000 films a year doesn't make you make 2,000 good films a year. There's a lot of garbage, but the idea that we've started to open some eyes to the fact that there are possibilities, there are filmmakers that are making good stuff, that there is a Rajamouli in the world, that there is a Lokesh Kangaraj who made a film called Vikram this year, who made Kaiti a few years ago. There's Rishabh Shetty, who made the film Kantara this year, who is a fantastic filmmaker who's been making both directing, not both, like directing, acting, and writing, producing films for the last 5 or 6 years, making really good stuff. Like there are a lot of talents in these places that people just aren't picking up on. And if anything, beyond the success that Rajamouli so rightfully deserves after 20 something years of work and honing his craft and just and doing amazing work, is the idea that like he's not a unicorn. Like there are other filmmakers out there that are doing good quality work, that are not necessarily making the exact same films that he is. Like there's not going to be another RRR for a while. I have resigned myself to that fact. I love a lot of Indian filmmakers, but this film is an anomaly. It is, it's a unicorn. It's a wonderful, brilliant film that's going to connect on so many levels. But there are, if RRR is a 10, there are dozens of 7s, 8s, 9s out there that people just haven't taken a chance on for a long time. And that's what I want to focus on, and maybe get that 10 again sometime in the next few years.
I work with a number of Indian colleagues at the school that I'm at, and they know I do a film review show, and I've recommended RRR, and I've asked them for recommendations. And that's a reoccurring theme is, Steve, not all Indian films are, breaking out into musicals. There's some good filmmakers that are doing some really good work that don't get the visibility that they should be getting. And that's what I'm hoping, maybe with the high visibility of RRR, that it'll shed a light on the broader film industry in India.
Well, I think already it has forced you and me, Steve, to watch more, because, I've seen a few over the years, I see a proper couple every year, but no more than that. But after we did RRR, the response that we have on our very tiny, very modest channel here on YouTube was overwhelming, and surprisingly overwhelmingly positive. because we were a bit nervous. Like, we know we don't really kind of know what we're talking about. This is just
Mhm.
going to be a gut reaction to something that we don't have a lot of context for. But the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. It was like, we're so happy that you enjoyed it so much. Here's some other stuff.
Mhm.
And already, you know, so we've kind of been sort of blindly picking in the dark a little bit. So we watched KGF parts 1 and 2 on the recommendations. And I know that you were like, really? Of all the things you could have watched, you watched that. But that's, you know, that was a title that just kept coming up. And it was an easy one to
coming. Yeah.
It was an easy one to remember, and it was an easy one to find because it was right there on Amazon. And so I think that's, I mean, it's been great in that way that it's been pushing us in that direction, and we'd love to do more. Vikram is one that I've actually been meaning to see. That's been at a sort of a festival or two that I've been to this year. But also, there is nonetheless, there remains that kind of daunting prospect that Indian cinema is, like you say, 2,000 films a year, and has been going for obviously decades and decades and decades. Where do you even begin? And I think that RRR might just be one little flag in the ground where you can be, we'll just start here and work outwards. And I think for a lot of people, that's what they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super intimidating, for sure. And it always has been. Like you know, you know, came back at you for this, but I hesitate to call myself an expert in Indian cinema just because there is so much. Like calling yourself an expert is just asking. It's cruising for a bruising. Like there's going to be 1,000 people out there that are going to know more than I do.
I will happily and very comfortably call you an expert. It's all about perspective.
I appreciate that, but the fact of the matter is that there is just so much, and it is super intimidating. And you know, on platforms like Amazon or like Netflix that have, you know, huge repositories of Indian films, even there, like it's intimidating. Like, I don't know what any of this is. I don't know who these actors are. I don't know who the directors are. Like, I don't know what the story's going to be. Is this going to be a musical? Is this going to be like a super gritty drama or a horror film? I don't know what to do. And so it's very difficult to sort of figure out, like, just steer yourself into a direction that might, you know, with the state of the internet today, like at least get you into, you know, okay, well, let me get this piece going on the algorithm so that it maybe steers me towards the next thing on the algorithm that might work for me, as opposed to this other complete garbage that's available as well. Because there's, you know, there's so much more chaff than wheat, and that's just not, it's not just India, it's everything. It's just that with India, like, you're not only watching the chaff, you're watching it and having to read at the same time. And so I get that it's frustrating and challenging, and it's not something you want to do all the time. But you know, with you know, we both write, Marsh and I write for Screen Anarchy, and so we do, like, I don't think I'm going to do one this year just because I've been so immersed in this RRR stuff. But like, over the last 10 years, I've done, you know, my favorite Indian films of the year. There's, I don't know, 160 films from the last decade that I really, really enjoyed from India. And a lot of which are streaming in some places, whether it's YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, who knows. So there are places to go for those kind of things. It's just that people don't know about that, and they're just very hesitant to jump in because it is intimidating. It's super intimidating. It's intimidating for me still, and I've watched God knows how many of these things over the last decade.
Okay, well then, just to put you on the spot as a final little, because you just said you wouldn't do it, so I'm going to make you do it. Give us just a couple of titles from the last 12 months that we could go and check out. Maybe filmmakers that are underrepresented. You talked Vikram already. I think I've seen that is on Amazon or Netflix right now. Maybe
Vikram, I believe, on the other side of the world, is on Hotstar.
Okay. I
believe it's on Disney Hotstar. Definitely, it's a lot of fun. It's sort of in the same vein as RRR as far as being a sort of like big actiony sort of thing. It also features a number of South India's most impressive actors. You've got Kamal Hassan in there, Vijay Sethupathi, Fahd Fazil. They're all like very good actors, and one of the most exciting directors in South India, who is Lokesh Kangaraj, who's done really, really great stuff. So Vikram, I would for sure recommend. Another film that I mentioned earlier is Kantara, which is on Amazon Prime, I believe, around the world. It's also on Netflix, but the Netflix version is dubbed. The Amazon Prime version is in the original Kannada language, which is directed, written, and starring Rishabh Shetty, who is one of the big like up and coming guys in South India. Super talented. It's, if you're a genre film fan, an action sort of like fantasy film fan, it felt to me sort of in the same vein as something like The Medium or The Wailing. Yeah. Not quite as horror-ish, but it's the same kind of like tribal folkish like sort of thing. Very excellent film, exceptionally well shot. And it's also happens to be produced by Hombali Films, who also did KGF and KGF 2. So it's the same kind of same world as those films. So those are a couple. You've also got Vasan Bala, who a few years ago directed The Man Who Feels No Pain. This year he has
I saw that.
Monica, yep. Oh My Darling. Yeah, Monica, Oh My Darling is on Netflix. It's a new sort of twisty crime thriller comedy. It's a really fun sort of film. So I think that's going to appeal to a lot of people. So those, Monica, Oh My Darling on Netflix, Kantara on Amazon Prime, and then you've got Vikram on Disney Hotstar. Those are three really solid recommendations, I feel.
James, I'm just going to agree with you. I think Josh is an expert in Indian film.
There you go. That's your compliment for the year. There you go.
Well, on the first, Jesus.
There you go. Get it out of the way quickly.
A whole other year.
You don't know how much it's
over there.
You don't know how much it stings. So. All right, I think we've got to wrap it up there. Otherwise, we're going to have to release this in chapters. But I just want to say thanks so much for taking the time talking to us today. It's been great, informative, entertaining, and all of the rest of it.
Yeah, Josh, thank you so much. Yeah,
it's great to see both of you.
Yeah, and I get to meet you. I look forward to meeting face to face. The one thing I want to end with is I'm not suggesting for a minute that SS Rajamouli needs to make a sequel to RRR, but if you're going to see him next week, there are many more evil British to be fought, and I think Beam and Raju could get out there and fight more. I love to, when we watch RRR, stick it to Marshy. I felt bad when we were in the cinema. Him being the Brit, I kind of
the one Brit in the cinema. Yeah, I'm American. I'm just scooting over a little bit. But
those wheels are in motion, and I will be happy to suggest Marsh for a beating in a Rajamouli film any day of the week.
I would be one. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't, but do say hello from me, and in case he does remember me from this very random, ill-informed interview that we did back in 2015, where I basically walked in and said, "I don't know who you are. I'm going to just ask you random questions." But it was a lot of fun. Before we go, where can people find you on social media? What have you?
On social media, I am at Hateful Josh on the usual channels, on Twitter and on Instagram. You can also find my writing occasionally at Screen Anarchy under J Hurtado. I did write a few things for the Austin Chronicle under Josh Hurtado as well, but Twitter and Instagram at this point, as well as Potentate Films on those channels as well.
Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully anybody can find you there and say some nice things with any luck.
We'll put some links in the description box below.
No, not for me. No. All right, excellent. That's it. That's going to be it. Cheers, Josh. Really appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course, it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, and good luck with RRR, and hopefully get to see you at some point this year.